Okay, so we are now starting chapter 15. Amazing. Um, and we are in the middle of talking about, well, we were in the middle of talking about last chapter, the reasons why someone sins. And we actually were discussing the difference. We're in a discussion of Tanya regarding the difference between a tzaddik and a Benoni. Now we have mentioned various things today. We're going to learn one more aspect of the difference between the tzaddik and a Benoni today, which is such a beautiful lesson. Like every chapter of Tanya that I open, I'm like, oh, this chapter is so beautiful. One chapter is like more beautiful than the next. Okay, so a tzaddik has no attraction whatsoever towards evil because a tzaddik has completely eradicated his animal soul. So he doesn't even have the minimum involuntary desire to think, speak, or do evil. The Benoni, on the other hand, evil is a desirable thing for him, even perhaps on an involuntary level. In other words, his conscious mind never sins, never thinks of sin, never speaks of sin, and of course never acts on sin. None of the expressions of the soul are involved in sin, but on an unconscious, involuntary level, evil is desirable to the Benoni, and therefore he can even relate to evil. He can understand why evil is desirable in someone else, for example. However, the expression of his animal soul is controlled. So he doesn't sin in neither thought, speech, and action. And there is an interesting Talmudic phrase about the difference between a tzaddik and a Benoni. This is actually not Talmudic, it's actually from the prophets in Malachi, where the description is given between the difference of a tzaddik and a rasha. Now, we know that most often when there are Talmudic discussions or halachic discussions, and as we will see now, the discussions are usually between the differences between a tzaddik and a Benoni, because traditionally, tzaddik and a rasha, sorry, because traditionally, that is how people are judged. However, so when we would say like a Benoni, we would be going back to the first parak of Tanya, we would be saying someone who sins half the time and does mitzvahs half the time, whereas a tzaddik is majority mitzvahs and a rasha is majority sins. But this is actually not the case according to Tanya, correct? So the Alter Rebbe takes a little bit of a deeper view on this pasuk, on this verse in Malachi, which discusses the difference between a tzaddik and a rasha. Now, this verse in Malachi says there is a tzaddik and a rasha, one who serves Hashem and one who doesn't serve Hashem. So when you're reading this verse, you can think, oh, okay, a tzaddik refers to somebody who serves Hashem, and a rasha is referring to somebody who doesn't serve Hashem. However, the question is asked, it's a little bit redundant. Like, why does the prophet have to repeat? Obviously, a tzaddik is one who serves Hashem. He is constantly involved in doing mitzvahs and learning Torah, etc. Right? So why do we have to repeat this whole thing? There's a tzaddik and a rasha, and one who serves Hashem and one who doesn't serve Hashem. So in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe is going to introduce us to another kind of Benoni. There are various types of Benonis. And he says that the last part of this verse is actually neither referring not to a tzaddik or a rasha, but to a Benoni, because there are two kinds of Benonis, one who serves Hashem and one who doesn't serve Hashem. Now, this is, wow, what do you mean a Benoni who doesn't serve Hashem? A Benoni is constantly involved. He doesn't even sin. He's constantly involved in the study of Torah, the fulfillment of mitzvahs. How can we consider a Benoni to be one that is not serving God? So to understand this, we have to look at the language that is used to describe this Benoni that's serving God and not serving God. The language used is a verb and not an adjective. It is not a description. So a tzaddik actually would not be called somebody who is an Oved Hashem, serving God actively. He is simply called an Eved Hashem, a servant of God. It's a description, much as you would say, oh, somebody is a king or somebody is a wise man. You would give a description. A tzaddik is given a description, an Eved Hashem, a servant of God. But an Oved Hashem, one who is serving God is serving God actively involved in a struggle. In other words, that is his service. He is in the present tense serving God. And what does his service of God entail? A struggle to overcome the desires of the animal soul, which is the Benoni. And therefore, we can understand, well, we will explain it obviously further, we can understand why there are two types of Benonis, one who is actively involved in the struggle and one who is not actively involved in the struggle. And let's explain it a little bit more. Okay, so again, the Benoni is involved, Benoni who is actively serving Hashem is involved in a struggle against his evil nature, because the nature of a person is found in the animal soul. The nature of a person is found in the animal soul. Let me just adjust my computer. I don't know why today I'm not finding the good position. So that we have to overcome the nature of the animal soul so that it should not find expression through the body. It is a constant battle. So the Benoni who is serving Hashem, there are two kinds of Benonis. The Alter Rebbe describes one as an Oved Elokim, one who's serving Hashem, and the other one, Asher Loi Avodoi, the one who is not serving God. So the one who is presently struggling and laboring to overcome his animal soul is considered to be serving God. Now the other Benoni is not considered to be serving God, but he is not a Russia. He is not a Russia. He is not conducting a battle presently. That is true. He never sins. He can be learning Torah constantly. He doesn't need to struggle with the Yetzer Hara for two reasons. Now, what does the struggle actually entail? Just let's remind ourselves what the struggle entails. The struggle entails letting the divine light, which illuminates the godly soul in the brain, to rule over the heart. That is the struggle, right? Right. Beforehand, we discussed the concept of moyach shalit al halev, mind over the heart, which is actually easy when there is clarity. All you have to do is kind of like switch the switch, turn on the switch. However, that is the battle. The battle between your desire to sin or to do something not for the sake of God is the desire of is the battle of not letting your divine soul illuminate your animal soul. So this Benoni who is not serving Hashem is not involved in the struggle, but he is not a Russia. And the reason that he's not involved in the struggle, there are two reasons for this. The first reason is because simply the mitzvahs that he does and the Torah that he learns are natural to him. It is his nature. Perhaps he has a more godly nature. He's just drawn towards that. He doesn't have to struggle to do those things that are godly, to do the will of Hashem. Maybe he enjoys learning. Maybe he's an introvert, so he doesn't go out and sin. Maybe he is of a more colder nature, so he doesn't have sexual temptations, for example. Tanya brings this example. Or for any other sin, he's not tempted. His nature is in harmony with the will of Hashem. He was gifted that nature, and the nature is found actually within the animal soul. So a person's personality, a person's nature. So he doesn't have so much struggle. He doesn't have to struggle against that nature of his animal soul. And therefore, for him, the hidden love that every Jew has, and we mentioned this hidden love last chapter, every Jew has a hidden love for Hashem that we received as an inheritance from our patriarch Avraham Avinu, which is usually dormant. There are ways, Tanya will speak later on, for ways to awaken this hidden love. And then there is also a love that is produced via our intellect. But for this Benoni, whose nature is godly, who doesn't have to fight so hard against his animal soul and against his nature, the hidden love of Hashem that every Jew possesses is sufficient for him to learn Torah and to do mitzvahs and to withstand temptation, because that is his nature. That's one reason why he would not be involved in a struggle. And therefore, We'll speak in one moment why he's considered not to be serving God. It sounds a little funny. The second reason why a Benoni would not be actively involved in a struggle, is because he's already been involved in the struggle. He struggled and withstood temptation and reflected and contemplated on godly matters. And finally, what was not his nature has now become his nature. In other words, in something, you're not in the habit of doing something, but you do it again and again and again and again, it becomes second nature. We call that in Hebrew, hergel na'aseh teva. Habit becomes nature. So this Benoni has already done the work. He's grown and he's contemplated and he's reflected and he's produced a love of Hashem, or he's awoken the hidden love for Hashem, which is in the soul of every single Jew. And now it's second nature. So he doesn't have to struggle anymore. He's kind of like arrived at this place where the struggle is over. And I've brought this example various times because many of my students have told me about this, but certain mitzvot that people do or come to do as a Baal Tshuva were maybe difficult in the beginning, but over time became second nature, and a person doesn't think about it, much as you wouldn't really think about brushing your teeth in the morning. So this Benoni has done the work and it's become second nature. So a Benoni who is not involved in a constant struggle is either because it's his nature or because he's already done the work and it's become his second nature. Unless he wants to do more. In other words, this Benoni that has arrived, if he's not satisfied with where he is, he wants to do more, then he is going to be actively involved in a new struggle. So to understand this, the Talmud brings an example, a very interesting example. In the times of the Talmud, when people learned Torah or Talmudic studies, they would review what they learned 100 times. Okay, we don't have so much time to do that, but reviewing is actually important because reviewing makes whatever you learned become part of you and internalizes it. The Talmud says that someone who reviews his studies 101 times is considered to be an Oved Elokim, serving God. But someone who only reviews 100 times is not considered to be serving God. And why is that? Why is the one extra time of review so significant? Why is that so significant? So 100 times, which was customary in those times, that's the comfort zone. 101 times, which goes beyond what was customary in those times, is going out of a person's comfort zone. And there is a mashal that the Gemara gives to explain this of donkey drivers. Very interesting. Donkey drivers, which were the taxi drivers of the generation, they would charge one zuz for a distance of 10 parsi. Parsi is like miles, let's say, right? But if a person wanted to go 11 parsi, the price became 2 zuz. So the price doubled for one extra mile. Why is that? Because that 11th mile exceeded their customary practice. The donkey drivers of the time were used to operating in a certain area, which was 10 parsi. If you asked them to go out of their area, which was 11 parsi, then the price doubled, because that's out of their nature, out of their comfort zone, which explains to us that breaking a habit, which would be considered reviewing the Torah learning 101 times, is equivalent to all the 100 times of the Torah learning which was reviewed prior. Now, we're not talking actually literally reviewing something 100 times, right? But we're talking about the growth that happens when a person, a potential Benoni or an actual Benoni, goes beyond his comfort zone. So in order to change a habit, for example, or to grow, to motivate yourself more, to control the expression of the nature of the animal soul, struggle and active service is required. And that is why a Benoni who is actively struggling, actively battling with its Yetzer Hara, actively growing, actively going outside of the comfort zone, is considered to be serving Hashem, whereas a Beinoni, as much good as he does, and many mitzvahs as he does, and as much Torah learning that he does, if a person is not growing and he's complacent, he's satisfied with where he is considered a Beinoni, but he's not considered to be actively serving Hashem. So how does one actively serve Hashem? How does one make sure that you're actively serving Hashem? Firstly, as we said previously, and Tanya will give us lots and lots of strategies in the upcoming chapter, by contemplating Hashem's greatness, because this produces a great love for Hashem. If you contemplate, use your intellect to produce an emotion, you are using your intellect by studying Hasidus or by studying different areas of godliness. You're producing an emotion in the right side of your heart, which is a great love of Hashem. And mitzvahs, as we will learn in upcoming chapters, mitzvahs need love and fear of Hashem to carry them upwards. And that is one way of being actively involved in the struggle. The other way is by awakening the hidden love. If you can't produce a love through your intellect, let's say a person doesn't have that intellectual capacity, but there are ways to awaken the hidden love, which is found in the heart of every single Jew. Because hidden love is not enough. The hidden love is not enough to compete with an active animal soul. It has to be awoken. It has to be activated. And there are ways of awakening, revealing this hidden love, which is in the heart of every Jew, which we have as an inheritance from our patriarch Avraham Avinu. The power of the love of Hashem enables him to transform his nature, thereby controlling, at the very least, the expression of the animal soul. So if we want to actually control our nature, change our nature, then we have to actually firstly study and produce a love of Hashem. If a Beinoni who is seemingly, so therefore a Beinoni who is seemingly perfect, he'd be seemingly perfect, he's always seemingly serving Hashem, he could actually be considered not to be serving Hashem unless he is growing. And this applies to each one of us as well, because a person is not judged by the quantity of things that we do, but we are judged by the effort and sacrifice we are putting in, which is a very, very, very important lesson. A Beinoni who appears to be a complete tzaddik is not necessarily considered to be serving Hashem. 1 minute, Penina. I just want to mention over here, I'm going to mention a few other things as well. Just this reminded me of the story of the Rambam. I'm not sure if you know the Rambam was a medical doctor as well, and in his times there were many ministers in the court of the Sultan where he was serving that really wanted him out. They were Jew haters and wanted him out. So they used to, badmouth him to the, I guess it was a sultan at the time. And one of the things that his ministers said that they could do and that he would not be able to do would be to actually different tricks. They would say, oh, we could do this and he can't, and they would have like little different competitions. So there were different examples, but one example comes to mind that they said that they were able to do is that they were going to teach cats to serve food, to be waiters. And they actually trained these cats to act like human beings, and the cats would actually walk on their 2 feet and carry trays of food and serve it. And all of a sudden, the Rambam walked in and he took out a mouse from his pocket, let the mouse loose, and all the cats dropped all the food and ran after the mouse. So there is actually a kuntris, which is a compilation of sichos and maimarim, which explains the essence of Hasidus, why we actually learn Hasidus. And one of the reasons, one of the things that the Rebbe says there is that Hasidus serves l'shanais as teva midoisov. Hasidus actually can change the nature of a person's midos. So we could have limiting beliefs and we could say, oh, I was born like this, my nature is such and such. Yes, it's true. Your nature is such and such. Your nature is to be a certain way, but through learning Hasidus, in other words, by contemplating God's greatness and producing a love of Hashem, we are actually capable of changing our nature. So maybe in the case of potential Beinonis, we change certain aspects of our nature. And in the case of a complete Beinoni, he's actually changed his nature, or at the very least controlling his nature. A tzaddik has completely changed his nature, but we are able to change our nature by actively serving Hashem, by actively studying and contemplating God's greatness, and in producing a love of Hashem. Serving Hashem is taking one step closer to Hashem and one step beyond ourselves. That is where you go out of your comfort zone. And also, and the Torah does not require us to jump miles and miles out of our comfort zone. Even one little step, as we see in this chapter, the 101th review and the 11 miles that were charged almost double, the one little step is considered already that you are serving Hashem. I'm going to get to your question in a minute, Penina, but this also reminds me, and always reminded me when I learned this chapter, there is an actual model in psychology, some attribute it to Robert Maslow, who has the whole other, hierarchy of needs, but this is a different thing about the stages of learning. And this, I think, brings it home. I don't know if you've ever heard of the 4 stages of learning. The 4 stages of learning, when someone learns a skill, for example, just to go through it briefly, the first stage is called unconscious incompetence, meaning you don't know that you don't know something. So let's say you're a little kid and you don't know that a car exists. So you don't even know that you don't know how to drive a car. That's the first skill. Unconscious incompetence, first level. The second level is conscious incompetence. So you know that you don't know. Now you might want to learn a skill, so you'll go to the third stage of learning, which is conscious competence. So like you start learning how to ride a bicycle, or learning how to ride a horse, or start learning how to drive a car. But since you're still learning, you have to be concentrating the whole time. You have to be conscious of your actions, right? And that brings you eventually to the 4th stage of learning, which is unconscious competence, which means you actually learn a skill and you're able to do it automatically without thinking too much. If you're at the 4th stage, you're a Beinoni who is not serving Hashem. The 3rd stage is where the growth happens. The 3rd stage is where serving Hashem happens. It's conscious competence. You're constantly struggling. You're constantly aware. You cannot become complacent. You are constantly on the lookout, and you're not satisfied with where you are. You always want to go one step further. Okay. Penina, you had a question or a commentary or comment? You have to unmute yourself.
No, I just turned on my camera. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I thought you mentioned that you had a question. No. Okay, so the lesson for today from the Beinoni, basically this chapter is about the Beinoni who serves Hashem and the Beinoni who does not serve Hashem. And they're both considered to be a Beinoni. They both do mitzvahs and they both study Torah. However, if you're not struggling and you're just coasting along, you're considered not to be serving Hashem, and that applies to all of us. So the struggle is where it's at. Doesn't matter what you're doing, it matters how you're achieving what you're doing. Which is why you can't really judge, from the outside. Like some students tell me, oh, I'm not religious. I'm like, why, no one can judge what's going on in the heart of everybody else. Like, okay, questions, comments?
I have a question. So I understand the difference between the 2 cases of the Beinoni, but a tzaddik is never struggling.
Exactly.
And yet he's still serving Hashem.
He is considered to be a servant of Hashem. That's the difference.
Okay.
The servant of Hashem. But he's not actively serving because he doesn't have that struggle. There is a pretty famous story of the Rebbe that there was someone who was about to intermarry, and he, his parents obviously were very distraught and took him to speak to this one and to that one. I'm probably forgetting a lot of the details of the story, but eventually he landed up at the Rebbe, and he, as a favor to his parents, and he thought this was going to be like one more rabbi, to tell him whatever it is that's not going to convince him exactly. And when he came into Yechidus, the private audience with the Rebbe said to him, didn't say anything to him about his intermarriage actually, and he said to him, I'm jealous of you. And he said, what? What do you mean? Like the Rebbe's a tzaddik, and he said, I'm jealous. I don't have this temptation. A tzaddik does not have the temptation to sin. And the end of the story was that he did not intermarry. Just going back to that story, and I'm leaving out 3,000 details. But a tzaddik does not have temptations to sin, which is why the Gemara tells us, "B'makom shebali tshuva oimdin, ein tzaddikim gemurim yicholim lamed." In a place where a Baal Tshuva stands, a complete tzaddik cannot reach that level. So yes, a tzaddik may have done the work to reach that level, and Hashem gifted him with this by emptying out the left side of his heart. And as David HaMelech says, "Libi cholol b'kirbi," my heart is empty within me, meaning that he does not have a Yetzer Hara. And the tzaddik is the epitome of a servant of God, and completely transformed this animal soul. But yes, the tzaddik doesn't have challenges. Tzaddik doesn't really have a level of free choice that we do. And a Beinoni could either be actively serving Hashem or not actively serving Hashem as well. But the Beinoni always has a certain aspect of struggle. But if he becomes complacent, and even us, I mean, okay, I'm speaking for myself. You could reach a certain level, and I'm definitely no Beinoni, but I could be satisfied with where I am. I'm not striving. If you're not striving harder and to grow, if you're not in growth mode, then you're not considered to be serving Hashem. You may be doing lots of good things, don't get me wrong, but you're not actively serving Hashem, and the goal is to actively serve Hashem. So, like, for example, let's say a Beinoni who's really seems to be serving Hashem, and he's davening, and he's learning, and has his whole kavanah, whatever. Maybe for him, his challenge is to find an ulterior motive for the good things that he does. Sometimes it's subtle, Sometimes the good things we do, the intention is not necessarily always to serve Hashem. Maybe the intention is self-serving. And we're really getting, into the higher level, because the bottom line is, ladies, is to do mitzvahs. And it doesn't matter why you do those mitzvahs. Doesn't matter if you're self-serving or not. It's good to do mitzvahs. Don't stop doing the mitzvahs. If you're self-serving, we discussed that before. Continue doing the mitzvahs and analyze your ego. Or, as Tanya gives an easier way, learn about Hashem and develop a greater love for him. When we develop a greater love for Hashem, that automatically subdues the animal soul. And this is the season, for going out of our comfort zone. We're coming up to Pesach. True freedom. True freedom is going beyond our limitations, overcoming our limiting beliefs of what we're capable of. Yep. Not getting nervous at all the people around us and lead up to, the Seder, etc., etc. Everybody has lots of Avodas Hashem to do this month. Okay. So next week, same time, same place.
Excellent class. Thank you.